The ranger gave us one strict rule: never use an axe on the black-barked trees. My friend broke it, and now I have a human skull in my backpack. This all started yesterday morning. My two friends and I planned a 3-day backpacking trip deep into an ancient, protected forest region. We wanted to get far away from the city, lose cell service, and just hike. We drove for 6 hours until the paved roads turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt. We parked at the main trailhead, which was located right next to a small wooden ranger station. A ranger stepped out of the building as we were strapping on our packs. He was an older man, wearing a pristine green uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. He smiled, walked over to us, and asked to see our backcountry permits. We handed them over. He reviewed the paperwork, checked our names against a clipboard, and handed them back. "You boys have a solid route planned," the ranger said, pointing to the trail map my oldest friend was holding. "You are heading into the oldest sector of the park. The canopy gets incredibly dense up there. You will lose the sun early, so make sure you pitch your tents before late afternoon." "We brought headlamps," my oldest friend replied. "We plan to push pretty far in today." The ranger nodded, but his expression grew serious. He folded his hands and leaned against the wooden railing of the station porch. "I need to give you the primary rule for this specific sector," the ranger said. His tone was entirely professional, but very strict. "As you get deeper into the valley, you are going to see a specific type of tree. They are massive and have entirely black bark. They look like they have been scorched by fire, but are completely natural. They are an endangered species of flora and incredibly fragile. We will not mess with them," I told him. "I need to be very clear," the ranger continued, looking each of us directly in the eyes. "Never use an axe on the black-barked trees. Never cut them, never carve your initials into them, and never try to harvest them for firewood. If you need to build a campfire, gather deadwood from the ground only. Do you all understand?" "Of course," my other friend said. "We respect the park rules. Deadwood from the ground only. We will not touch the black trees." "Good," the ranger said, smiling again. "Have a safe hike, boys." We left the trailhead and walked into the woods. The hike was challenging. The elevation gain was steep, and the terrain was covered in thick roots and loose rocks. The deeper we walked into the forest, the older the environment felt. The trees grew wider, and the branches overhead interlocked, blocking out the blue sky. Around noon, we saw the first black-barked tree. The ranger had not exaggerated. The tree was gigantic. The trunk was easily 10 feet wide, and the bark was a deep, matte black. It stood out completely against the brown and green colors of the surrounding forest. As we pushed deeper into the valley, we saw more of them, scattered among the normal pines and oaks like dark pillars. We hiked for another 4 hours. We were exhausted, sweating, and ready to stop for the day. We found a flat clearing near a small creek and decided to make camp. As we were unrolling our tents, the weather shifted. The temperature dropped sharply. Dark gray clouds rolled over the canopy, and a sudden, violent rainstorm began. So the water came down in heavy sheets, soaking us to the bone within seconds. We scrambled to get the tents up. We threw our gear inside and huddled in the nylon shelters, shivering in our wet clothes. The storm lasted for 2 hours. It battered the tents and turned the campsite into a muddy swamp. When the rain finally stopped, the sun was already setting. The forest plunged into a dark, freezing twilight. We crawled out of the tents. Our teeth were chattering, the temperature was dropping fast, and we were completely soaked. We knew we needed a fire immediately to dry our clothes and prevent hypothermia. "Spread out and find deadwood," my oldest friend instructed, his voice shaking from the cold. "Look for anything dry under the bushes." We spent 20 minutes searching the area around the campsite. It was useless. The storm had saturated everything. Every branch on the ground was soaked through, crumbling into wet mush when we tried to snap it. My other friend walked back to the center of the camp, holding a small camping hatchet. He looked angry and completely miserable. "There is nothing dry on the ground," he said, gripping the hatchet tightly. "Everything is completely waterlogged. We are not going to get a fire started with wet bark. We have to keep looking," I told him. "Maybe under the rock overhang near the creek." "No," he snapped, pointing the hatchet toward the edge of the clearing. "I am freezing. We need dry wood from the inside of a trunk." He pointed directly at a massive black-barked tree standing just 10 yards away from our tents. "The ranger specifically told us not to touch those trees," I argued, stepping in front of him. "He said they are an endangered species. You will get us a massive fine." "I do not care about a fine," my friend argued back, pushing past me. "I care about not freezing to death tonight. The tree is huge. Taking one chunk out of the side is not going to kill it, and the wood inside will be completely dry. I am doing it." I tried to grab his shoulder, but he shook me off. He walked right up to the massive black trunk and raised the hatchet high above his shoulder and swung it forward with all his strength. The steel blade bit deeply into the black bark. My friend grunted, pulling the hatchet handle downward to pry the wood loose. The blade popped free. Thick red blood poured from the cut. It was a deep, dark crimson liquid. It spilled out of the gash in the bark, running down the black trunk and pooling on the exposed roots. The metallic smell of copper instantly filled the air. My friend dropped the hatchet into the mud. He backed away, staring at his hands, which were now speckled with red drops. "What did you do?" my oldest friend whispered, stepping backward. The forest changed immediately. The sounds of the woods completely vanished. The crickets stopped chirping. The frogs in the creek stopped croaking. The wind died down entirely. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears. A loud rustling noise broke the silence. It came from the canopy directly above the bleeding tree. We looked up. Something dropped from the high branches. It landed on the ground with a heavy, sickening thud, crouching low on the muddy roots. It was a creature that defied any natural biology. The lower half of its body resembled a deer, with backwards bending joints, coarse brown fur, and sharp, split hooves. But the upper half was entirely different. The torso was stretched, pale, and hairless, resembling a starving human. The arms were incredibly long, ending in hands with elongated, multi-jointed fingers. The head was the worst part. It possessed a massive, sprawling rack of jagged antlers, but the face was a blank slab of pale skin. It had no eyes. It had no nose. The only feature on its face was a wide, vertical slit that opened to reveal rows of flat, grinding teeth. The creature stood up. It towered over us, standing at least 8 feet tall. It turned its blank face toward the bleeding tree trunk. It reached out with a long hand and touched the red liquid. It tilted its head back and released a sound. It sounded like a distorted, grating siren, full of pure rage. "Run!" I shouted. We scattered in 3 different directions. Panic completely took over my mind. I sprinted into the dark brush, pushing blindly through thorn bushes and low-hanging branches. I heard the crashing sound of the creature charging behind me. I dove behind a large moss-covered boulder and dropped to the ground, pressing my face into the wet dirt. I held my breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I looked through the ferns. My oldest friend was running about 50 yards to my left. He tripped over a root and fell hard onto his hands and knees. The creature was standing in the center of the clearing. When my friend fell, his hand snapped a dry branch on the ground. The creature's head instantly snapped toward the exact direction of the sound. It locked onto the noise, then dropped onto all fours and launched itself toward my friend with terrifying speed. My friend scrambled to his feet and ran deeper into the woods, leading the creature away from my position. I knew I could not run. The forest floor was covered in wet leaves and snapping twigs. If I tried to move through the brush, the creature would hear me and hunt me down. I needed a place to hide. I looked back at the campsite. The bleeding black tree was still standing there. I noticed a massive, dark opening at the base of the trunk, hidden between 2 sprawling roots. The center of the tree was hollow. I crawled on my stomach, moving agonizingly slow to avoid making any noise. I crossed the mud, reached the roots, and squeezed my body into the hollow opening of the black trunk. The inside of the tree was pitch black. The air smelled intensely of dried blood and old dirt. The space was tight, barely large enough for me to sit cross-legged. I leaned my back against the curved wooden wall. As I shifted my weight, my hands brushed against something cold and metal resting on the dirt floor. I pulled my hands back. I sat completely still for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the creature crashing through the woods. It was far away, chasing my friend. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I turned the flashlight setting on and immediately covered the lens with my fingers, letting only a tiny sliver of light escape into the hollow space. I pointed the dim light at the floor between my boots. Resting in the dirt was a hunting knife. The blade was heavily rusted, and the wooden handle was wrapped in decaying leather. I carefully picked it up. Carved deeply into the bottom of the wooden handle were 3 letters. Initials. I recognized the initials immediately. They matched the name tag the ranger wore on his uniform at the trailhead. I pointed the sliver of light back down at the dirt. Underneath the spot where the knife had been resting, a round, white object was partially buried in the soil. I used my free hand to brush the loose dirt away. It was a human skull. The bone was stained brown from the earth. I stared at it in horror. I noticed a massive, straight crack running directly down the center of the forehead. The bone had been completely cleaved open. I held the rusted hunting knife up to the skull. I aligned the blade with the crack. The width and thickness of the blade perfectly matched the damage to the bone. I heard a loud crunching sound outside the tree. A hoof stepped onto the roots. The creature had returned. I immediately turned off my phone light and plunged back into darkness. I clamped both of my hands tightly over my mouth and nose to muffle the sound of my own breathing, then squeezed my eyes shut. The creature paced slowly around the outside of the trunk. I could hear its hooves scraping against the mud and it sniffing the air, the wet, rasping sound of its breath echoing in the quiet forest. It stopped pacing, then stood directly in front of the hollow opening. I waited for it to reach inside and grab me. Instead, the creature spoke. It used human words, but the voice was wrong. It sounded like multiple voices layered over one another, speaking in a raspy, stolen tone. He fills the roots with the broken ones, the creature spoke. The voice vibrated through the wood of the tree. He digs the hollows, leaves the meat for the dirt, and hides his sins inside my skin. I kept my hands clamped over my mouth. Tears stung my eyes. I was listening to the monster talk to itself. He tells the travelers to leave the black bark alone, the creature continued, its voice dripping with hatred. He knows the rule. He knows if the bark bleeds, I must protect the grove and hunt the ones who spill the sap. He uses my anger to guard his graves, to make me the killer of the curious. The creature scraped its hooves angrily against the dirt. I cannot leave the shadows, it whispered. I cannot walk the path to his wooden house. He wears the carved bones, the wards on his chest. The dead cannot touch him. I cannot see him. He is safe from the teeth, while he fills my trees with his rot. I sat in the dark. I knew I could not stay in the tree forever. I had no food, no water, and my friends were either dead or lost in the woods. If I tried to run, the blind creature would hear me and kill me. There was only one option. I slowly pulled my hands away from my mouth and took a deep breath. I can stop him, I said aloud. The creature instantly stopped moving. The silence returned. I slowly crawled forward. I pushed my head and shoulders out of the hollow opening, then stood up in the mud, keeping my hands empty and raised in the air. The creature was standing right in front of me. It was towering, its blank face angled slightly downward, listening to my exact position. I found the skull, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my entire body was shaking. I found his knife. I know what the ranger is doing to you. I know he uses you to hide his murders. The creature did not move. It breathed slowly. "If you kill me, his secret stays hidden," I told the creature. "He will keep bringing bodies here, and will keep using your trees. But if you let me walk away, I will take the evidence. I will take it to the people who can arrest him, so we can bring him to justice, and he will never bury another body in your grove again." The creature took a step closer. The massive antlers blotted out the moonlight above. It leaned its face down until it was inches from my own. I could smell the earth on its breath. It slowly opened its mouth. The vertical slit parted, and the jaw unhinged, stretching incredibly wide. The throat opened into a dark, massive cavern. I looked inside the mouth, and I saw them. The faces of the dead. Pale, translucent human faces were embedded in the dark tissue of the creature's throat. The faces opened their mouths, and they spoke to me in unison. The Green Man keeps a record. The faces whispered, their voices echoing directly into my mind. He keeps a book of names. He keeps the rings from our fingers, and the plastic cards with our pictures. "Where?" I asked the faces. "Where does he keep them?" "In his wooden house," the faces replied. "Under the floor. The third wooden board from the iron stove. The board is loose. The box is metal. Take the book. Take the rings. Show the world his sins." The creature closed its mouth. The vertical slit sealed shut, hiding the faces in the dark. It took a step backward, then turned around, walking slowly away from the bleeding tree, disappearing into the dark canopy of the forest. It was letting me go. It had accepted the deal. I dropped to my knees. I reached into the hollow trunk and grabbed the rusted hunting knife and the fractured human skull. I unzipped my backpack and placed both items securely inside. I stood up and began walking through the woods. I walked carefully, placing my feet softly on the ground. I found my friends an hour later. They were hiding together inside a deep rocky ravine near the creek. They had stayed completely silent, which is why the creature had not found them. They were terrified and shivering, but they were unharmed. I told them we had to leave immediately. I did not explain the deal I had made. I just told them the creature was gone, and we had to hike back to the car. We walked through the forest all night. We navigated by the moonlight and the compass on my phone. We reached the trailhead just as the sun was starting to rise. The small wooden ranger station was dark and empty. We threw our gear into the trunk of our car and drove away from the state park as fast as the gravel roads would allow. We reached the nearest town about an hour later. It was a small, quiet place with a single main street. I parked the car directly in front of the local police station. "I am going in," I told my friends, grabbing my backpack from the floorboard. "I have an evidence for murders. I am going to tell them everything." I walked up the concrete steps to the glass double doors of the police station. I reached for the handle, but I stopped. I looked through the glass into the lobby. The ranger was standing inside. He was wearing his pristine green uniform, holding a cup of coffee, and he was laughing loudly. Sitting around the front desk were the local sheriff and 3 deputies. They were all drinking coffee, smiling, and joking with the ranger. I looked closer. Hanging around the ranger's neck was a small, carved piece of white bone tied to a leather string. It was the ward, the charm that protected him from the creature and the dead. I looked at the sheriff. He was wearing the exact same carved bone charm around his neck. I looked at the 3 deputies. Every single one of them had a carved bone charm resting against their uniform shirts. My blood ran completely cold. I backed away from the glass door, then turned around, walked down the steps, and got back into my car. "Drive," I told my oldest friend who was sitting in the driver's seat. "Just drive out of this town right now. We have been driving for 2 hours. We are currently parked outside a diner near the interstate. I am holding the backpack on my lap. The skull and the rusted knife are sitting inside it. I know exactly where the ledger and the trophies are hidden in the ranger's house, under the 3rd floorboard by the iron stove. The evidence is all there, waiting to be collected. But I cannot take this to the local cops. If I walk into that station, they will see the skull, They will see the knife, and they will arrest me. Or worse, they will just drive me back out to the black-barked trees and finish the job themselves. The blind creature kept its end of the deal, so I have to keep my end of the deal. Please, if anyone reading this has the authority to help, tell me what my next step should be.